So alien isolation takes us to 15 years after the Nostromo incident, and we see Amanda Ripley, daughter of Ellen, who is seeking her lost mother. We begin on October 24th, 2137, where the Anisadora salvage ship picks up the derelict's beacon and lands on LV-426 to investigate. And while they are there, they disable the beacon so no future ships detect it. However, in the process, they become infested with a face hugger. On the 28th of October, Sevastopol announces it is closing and begins reducing its crew and is put up for sale. And on November 11th, the Anisadora reaches Sevastopol station and word is sent over the network that they recovered the Nostromo flight recorder, and so Amanda is recruited by Samuels to travel and collect it. Meanwhile, the medical staff on the station are examining the facehugger, and by the next day the chestburster erupts and flees into the massive station. The crew of the Anisadora go into hiding after this, while Captain Marlowe is detained and interrogated. Over the next 3 days, the medical sector is quarantined as the xenomorph reaches maturity and begins attacking people. On the 16th of November, Ransom sends samples to the Gemini labs, potentially the facehugger, and the following day, Sevastopol is removed from the buyer's market, likely because it is in actual fact being bought by Weyland-Yutani discreetly. Now, as infighting begins, Ransom suggests catching the xenomorph, and it is revealed he is in actual fact trying to get on good with Weyland-Yutani after they have bought the station. By the 26th of November, the crew of the Anisadora are found and questioned, and then the regular Joes begin attacking people on company orders. The flight data of Nostromo is corrupted, likely by Marlowe, to keep it out of company hands, and then he sets his own ship adrift. On December 2nd, the security team then go rogue as the xenomorph continues its attacks, and we discover that a hive has been established in the reactor area where evidence suggests that a queen has likely developed, as we find multiple eggs are present here and the xenomorphs are multiplying via these eggs. However, notably, the people on the station are unaware of the hive and still think it is one xenomorph they are seeing randomly attacking, when it is in actual fact multiple scouts crawling throughout the infrastructure of the station. Now, on December 11th, Ripley arrives and finds the station in a state of disrepair. Alongside company agent Taylor and Samuels, they spacewalk to the station but are separated by debris. While trying to reunite with them, Ripley encounters Axel and sees the xenomorph for the first time. She also finds the corrupted flight recorder and encounters the working Joes, which prevent any communications outside of the station and kill anyone who tries. After reuniting with the others, she enters the medical facility to get Taylor some help, and then also uncovers a trap set for the xenomorph before encountering the marshal. Together they work on a plan which leads the xenomorph into a module which is then ejected into the gas giant, with Ripley inside it as collateral. However, she manages to survive by ejecting in a spacesuit and then returning to the station. The Joes go on the offensive at this point as they are actively defending the xenomorph, and Ripley is able to access the Apollo computer core after Samuels sacrifices himself to gain access, and she discovers that Order 939 is in effect in order to recover the organism, and evidence suggests it is not eradicated as they had thought, and that there is unclear signals coming from the reactor core. Investigating this, Ripley then finds the hive under the reactor and initiates a purge to wipe it out. However, we see this does not actually work, and the Xenos survive this and flood up into the station as a result. It is unclear if the queen that was underneath the hive dies or also escapes and Ripley just never encounters it, as there is evidence of more hive areas being built around the station following this. Ripley would take a small shuttle to the Anisadora and finds a secret message from her mother on board the Narcissus, and Marlowe attempts to turn the ship into a massive bomb to wipe out the Sevastopol station to prevent the company from getting the xenomorphs. However, the ship is prevented from initiating its self-destruct. However, it still goes into meltdown and tears itself apart, damaging Sevastopol's station and making it fall out of orbit, rather than outright destroying it. Now, returning to the station, Ripley is captured by xenomorphs while attempting to dock the Torrens, but she manages to escape from the hive and heads to the Torrens, going EVA to separate the ship as the station plunges into the planet, taking it with it. Upon releasing the Torrens, however, she finds that it is also managed to become infested by the fleeing xenomorphs, and so she ejects herself into space in order to avoid one of them getting her. The story ends with her adrift in space until what appears to be the light of a passing ship picks her up. We also see in this ending that several xenomorphs are left adrift in space as a result of this incident, and presumably enter a state of hibernation like the one we saw in Romulus. And so it's entirely possible that this event leads to multiple future infestations of xenomorphs if any of these instances that we see adrift are picked up. Continuing on the saga of the films, we find Alien Covenant takes place, which opens on a scene of Weyland talking to David, who asks him who created him if he created David, and notes that all art is meaningless in the face of the question. And Weyland is displeased as David looks upon his own creator as inferior, which makes Weyland ponder the question, what if his own creators are inferior to him? Now we find on December 5th, 2104, the Covenant ship is en route to Ordegai 6, and we see it dropping off to recharge its systems. Notably, at this point in the timeline, we see that the crews go into hypersleep while an android oversees the security systems of the crew and the cargo. And this ship is notably carrying colonists and embryos, most likely fleeing from an Earth that is dying. Now, while the ship is recharging, a neutrino burst damages it and causes the crew to be awakened in an emergency. However, the captain perishes within his cryopod. We also find that from Earth it appears that exoplanet scanning has become so detailed that they can see lakes on Ordegai 6 from Earth via their scans. And we also find that while outside repairing the ship, a comms buffer is in place around the craft. However, being this far out allows someone to pick up a message. So for some reason the ships have comm barriers at this point in the timeline, which is interesting as this would seem to imply that they are preventing any rogue transmissions from entering, potentially carrying viruses. Now, we also find that people of faith in this world appear to be looked upon as extremists, which is interesting given Elizabeth Shaw in the previous film was a person of faith, and also we saw in Aliens 3, the prisoners were people of faith. So it appears that as humanity has moved to the stars, faith has needed to rebrand itself in some way as gods themselves, while not specifically an earth-based thing, can be pulled into question upon humanity leaving Earth. What is God when humans can pave their way through the cosmos? Now, the signal that they detect tracks back to a system of 5 planets, and the fourth one is a perfect Earth-like planet. However, it does have multiple moons, and it has never showed up on any scans before. And given that it is a short trip and will not require them to get into the pods again, as no one wants to following the death of the captain, they decide that it's better to go here than to continue on their 7-year journey to Ordegai 6. However, some of them see this as too good to be true, and they are reminded that it is their responsibility to investigate, again bringing up the special order to recover alien intelligence. And so we see the planet actually is covered in plasma storms, and on the surface we find wild wheat growing, which appears to have been cultivated much like Earth wheat, implying that either David himself planted it, or the engineer beings that live on this planet planted it, and therefore potentially took the same seeds to Earth. Now, following a path of damaged trees, they discover the derelict which David and Shaw arrived in on this planet, and they note that there are no animal noises or birdsong in the area, and they are also unaware that there are moat pods which exist across the surface of the planet and release spores when disturbed. And one of these enters the ear and another enters the mouth of members of the expedition. While entering the ship, they find Shaw's tags, and it is revealed to us that the Prometheus is believed to be a legend as it vanished back in the day. Now, when the crew begin to fall ill from their exposure to the motes rapidly gestating inside of them, we find that out of a fear of illness, one of the crew locks another in the medbay with the infected host, and we see that the neomorph form bursts from the back of the host, using its spine-like head to rip them open. Now we find that these are different from your standard xenomorph gestations, as they grow incredibly quickly and are also fully formed with all their limbs and are pale and don't turn into the black shelled exoskeleton form that we see with typical xenomorphs. It also appears that they do not actually possess acidic blood either, which again makes me think that the black skin and the acidic blood are indeed tied together. It is a form of Teflon-like sleeve to keep the acidic blood within its body. Now we do see, however, that the bite of one of these things is able to burn off the android arm, implying that they do potentially still possess this acidic fluid within their bodies, but not in such a great quantity. Now, David comes to the rescue of the crew as they are being assaulted by these newly birthed xenomorphs, and then leads them through the ruins of the plaza filled with the bodies of the engineer race which was destroyed here. And then they enter a temple with massive stone heads. David insists that the virus released upon their landing on the planet and that it is engineered to destroy all non-botanical life, which it either kills outright or hybridizes. And we already get clues based on the cinematography here that David is too far gone, as we see his reflection is distorted, which shows that he is broken. It is revealed that he has been here for 10 years, and all of the life forms created appear to have all died out by now, following the initial infection. And Walter would reveal to David here that his model is actually replaced at some point after Prometheus because they were too creepy, far too human-like for people's tastes. We find that David has continued his experiments over these past 10 years and has been manipulating and hybridizing the life forms in order to create what he perceives to be the perfect life form. And so, as a result of this, he has created multiple life forms, and it seems that the trend is that the shape always seems to tend towards the shape of an egg or a facehugger or the xenomorph life form. And we find that David has perfected his own eggs, at least 6 or 8 of them, which are present under his lab, and it is unclear how these were made. However, egg morphing is a possibility based on how the genetic material is affected by the mutagen. And David notes that these eggs are waiting for their mother to his unwilling host before he is face-hugged, which creates an extremely quick infection, most likely because David has engineered these xenomorphs in this way. And we see a praetomorph is born as a result, which is far more savage than your typical xenomorph, and is also born with all of its limbs fully formed, and notably with high heel-like legs, which we see in the predator versions of the xenomorph. So again, we find that the far more primitive form of the xenomorphs appear to have the more digitigrade legs. Now, David considers humans a dying species that don't deserve another chance, and he has found perfection in the creation of the xenomorphs. And then there's even the random quote of "When you close your eyes, do you dream of me?" which makes me wonder, during their time together, did David and Shaw have some form of in-depth knowledge of the xenomorph life cycle that we have yet to be actually told about, as Shaw most likely died because she was infected by the black goo in Prometheus, and it gradually led to deteriorating her body. So it is possible that Shaw could see the lady in the dark as a result of this, and David is frantically trying to figure out what this is. Now, David tries to take out Walter, however, he is unaware that since his day, the androids have now been updated to be able to heal themselves, which is something that his model did not have. And we find that Shaw's body was actually used for tests by David. Now, a second facehugger is shown to bleed acid and is also capable of rapidly implanting an embryo in the space of a few seconds before being ripped off of the host. And then we find that the pretomorph has also rapidly grown to full size and begins savagely attacking the surviving crew members. David continues to fight with Walter, however, and then somehow manages to get the upper hand and then take his place with the crew without them realising, which is curious as we never get an in-depth explanation as to what happens here, as if David actually took over Walter's body, surely he would have the ability to heal, but he does not appear to, just based on the fact that his wounds don't appear to heal. So he took out Walter and then modelled himself after him in order to blend in. And so we find here that once the pretomorph is dispatched using a claw on part of the terraforming equipment, the crew return to the ship thinking they are safe. However, a second pretomorph is born from the second facehugger victim. However, they manage to dispatch it by impaling it and then dropping it into the atmosphere of the planet to burn up. Once the crew head back into cryosleep, David reveals that he has in actual fact replaced Walter and then claims in his logs that all of the crew perished in a solar flare incident. In 1.36 years, the network will receive his message as they continue on to Orgai 6, which we never actually get a conclusion for so far in the franchise. Now, we do also find that in 2019, there was a short release called Last Signs of Life, where the company explored David's lab and detect an unknown pathogenic substance, as well as evidence of hybrid experiments and also an alien egg, which, while scanning it, it begins to activate and then attacks the scientist who is examining it, which implies that at some point after this film, the company find David's notes and his lab and then cause a potential second outbreak on the planet. And so we find from the Advent message from David to the company, he admits that he wiped out the planet and then killed Shaw and tried to evolve her into something more before using her DNA and parts to create his new creatures. Now, he notes that the alien race here believed that sacrifice cleansed their sins, and then they tried to banish the wolf and undo their creation. So likely they sacrificed themselves to create life. However, in creating the xenomorph, they tried to undo this as they saw it as ungodly. David notes that he has the wolf and his flock, aka the crew, and now he needs to perfect his queen, which he then says he will set loose upon the galaxy.